I hope you enjoyed coffee and break time. And I want to thank our sponsors, because with their support, this organization is possible in the way we do it. And before starting the last part of this morning, I want to congratulate you all. And I see two main reasons. Outside, there's a sunny Barcelona, and you agreed to be locked up here in this dark room. And the second reason is you agreed to listen to us all. Everyone in the room, you have made the right choice. It's not often that you have the chance to reflect on the role of future global mobility, or about mobility architects and the evolving business models. Of course, we are living in a world in transition. It's not a financial crisis, it's not an economical crisis, it's not a technical crisis. This world is in transition. We have disruptive changes. And as far as I'm concerned, the most important change for me is that for the first time in my lifetime, everything changes. So, the disruptive changes will need breaking out leadership. And I wish you, for this morning, to wonder often, to open your mind, because then we will find the solutions to survive and to be the fittest. And we will be inspired by a presentation about the advantages of embracing disruption. So the need of disruption to move forward. I have the honor to invite on stage Mr. Graeme Banister, Consulting Director, Frost Sullivan. Give him a warm applause.
Morning, everyone. Great pleasure to be here in 2020. I'm hoping in 2020 the Brexit has been sorted and there's no Trump, but we shall see. Has that changed? I don't know. Maybe it has. Okay, so as introduced, I'm going to kind of talk you through some of the trends, really, that are affecting mobility and the things that you now need to be considering. The title that was provided to me was The Advantages of Embracing Mobility Disruption. Actually, I kind of changed that a little bit to Bracing for Disappointment if you do not. I think that's the fundamental piece that needs to be considered here. Things are changing, as just mentioned there, technologically, politically, economically. The world is a different place. Us as individuals are looking for different solutions, and therefore, as providers, or indeed as fleet operators, you have a responsibility to take forward this societal change. When we talk about change, Frost and Sullivan, we look at predominantly trends. So trends is our starting point for then considering the implications. And I've picked kind of eight of the ones that are most pertinent right now, I think, within this context. I'll cover off most of these within this. I mean, a couple that I'm not going to cover off so much. Vehicle redesign. I think everyone kind of can see how vehicles are changing. You know, I've spoken with quite a few markets recently. The sedan is dead. Someone mentioned to me in Austria, he said, the sedan is dead. So if you've got them, maybe you need to move those. But the SUV, the minivan, vehicles that are so much more, can do multitasks. I think that's what people are looking for, that can move people, that can move goods. Electrification as well. Won't really cover that one. We know this is coming. Just look at it. It's on a tipping point. Electrification's coming. You only have to be at the recent motor shows to kind of see how we've moved in a matter of short years from miles per gallon to miles per charge, and it's not going to go backwards. So those kind of things are happening. But the ones I want to cover off a lot are connected, autonomous, new mobility models, fundamentally sharing. These are the ones that I really want to look at. But the first one actually is on their digitization of everything. I think when we look at our part of the sort of the automotive value chain, but look at the wider context. You know, everything is being changed by digital. The front end is getting changed, after sales are getting changed, the digital and the data and the insights that are being driven by these new, this technology is changing the way that products are developed. It's changing the speed in which products can be implemented, tested. So much more piloting and beta of stuff these days. Get something out there, try it, and then move forward. In terms of manufacturing as well, there is so much more rich data there to actually then build that into the product planning cycle. So digital is one of the key things, and I know that as companies and as providers to the fleet industry, it is one of your sort of top priorities, the digital transformation. But outside of that, I wanted to talk about connectivity. We've all got them. My phone is actually buzzing as I speak, so I really should have turned that off. But connectivity is, we all have devices. The car is going to be the next connected device. I don't know if you saw the news yesterday, Samsung bought Harman for $8 billion. The chief officer of Samsung, and is also their chief strategy officer, said, the connected car is the smart technology that over the last decade, the phone's gone from being just a few features to something which is a very powerful device. The car is becoming a very powerful device and part of a wider ecosystem. We've obviously gone from a point, all those various points, technology and telematics, etc., is providing through connectivity. We've gone from very much a kind of embedded after-sales product, hardware-based, to now we're into that kind of middle phase of kind of tethered and integrated, which is software, and we're moving very, very fast into the kind of services position. And therefore, you'll see the telematics companies, I'm expecting them more and more to kind of differentiate themselves and actually call themselves fleet management companies. That is what they're doing. If they target their market correctly, that's really where they want to be. So now they've moved away from hardware into software, that's for sure. I will see them reposition even more as a fleet management company, providing all of these opportunities. The challenge has always been with connected and telematics is making the business model stack up. I know, again, from many of the providers, it's a challenge, and it's also a challenge for the customer to actually see, should I really embrace this? Can I really understand what it's going to deliver for me? And you've got to look at all the different levels. You've got to have a system, and you've got to have a business model that speaks to all the various components. It's got to work for the drivers. Obviously, one of the great challenges of telematics is driver acceptance. The lack of industry standards to actually permit this to work in a consistent manner. For the fleet operators, how is that actually going to help me in terms of allocating? I think one of the key things now with telematics, and this is where it touches with electrification, vehicle allocation. The consulting piece around profiling what vehicles can potentially be moved from internal combustion engine to electric. I see that being one of the real growth areas because there's many cars that can be moved. The mentality is changing. Cars can do 600 kilometers now on a charge, but actually, how often do your drivers drive for 600 kilometers in a stretch? Very, very little times. So therefore, there's a great opportunity to really start to really kind of drive, as an industry, drive the move to electric. For the providers, obviously there's a whole bunch of reporting stuff that telematics can do way in advance of what's already achievable. And even below this level, even below the vehicle providers, then you're coming into manufacturers and supply chain. You can provide back and actually monetize. And I think fundamentally the data that's being driven out of telematics and the connected car, that is driving things because there is data that can be monetized at all levels. So the manufacturers would want the information to understand how those cars are being used and how they can be improved. So connected, we all know it, massive, making the business model work, challenge. The other thing, we are in 2020, and actually next year we're all going to be driving around in autonomous cars, according to Ford. So autonomous is changing very, very quickly. I mean, it's incredible. Within a matter of 2 or 3 years, we're now in a place where the manufacturers have teamed up with the technology providers and are actually stating now we will have X amount of vehicles at a point in time. So Ford, they're expecting to have 100,000 fully autonomous vehicles available, deployed for ride sharing in next year. And we've got huge investments being made by all the manufacturers in tech. Volvo are partnering with Uber. You've got GM, obviously invested in Lyft, specifically looking at the autonomous piece and self-driving. And obviously, the $1 billion acquisition of Cruise, which is kind of retrofitting automation. That's a company with about 14 people. They bought it for $1 billion. Incredible amounts of money that are being thrown at this space. But that is, if the manufacturers are taking it seriously, you as an industry need to take it seriously. And fundamentally, autonomous. We talk about all the different players that are coming into this space and what's going on here. Autonomous, the cars need to be able to see. They see through mapping. And that's where the technology companies are really sort of in this game and really driving and spearheading this new dimension. So Apple, obviously, already extensively into mapping. You've got Uber, which is placing huge amounts of bet on self-driving, on autonomous. They've acquired mapping companies. Google the same. Obviously, they've been going around for several years mapping roads, but now they're buying additional mapping and technology companies. That is the foundation of self-driving. And if you understand that piece, then you can see why technology plays such an important role in this. So within new mobility business models, so sharing is kind of the most advanced when you look at all the different mobility categories. Sharing is growing very, very quickly. Right now, there's probably about 8 million members of sharing companies around the world. My maths ain't too good, but there's about, I don't know, what will that be? About 125,000, 110,000 vehicles. 2025, so 5 years from now, so probably now we're about, let's say, 16, 17 million. In 5 years' time, we'll be up to sort of 25 million based on projections here. Sharing is increasingly important. It's increasingly important. And I think it's fundamental to leasing. One of the things that my team and I track a hell of a lot is the shift from ownership to usage. Once you're into the usage mode, then you're effectively moving into that multiple use of vehicles and starting to get into a place where actually I use a vehicle that's best fit for me. So during the week, I might use a small vehicle. During the weekends, when I'm traveling kids around or I'm traveling a further distance, I would use a larger vehicle or an SUV or a different type of vehicle. So you can see how sharing is really on a cusp here in terms of an opportunity. So that's more the traditional car sharing. Within that, of course, we talk about corporate car sharing as well, which is very, very small at the moment. I still believe that corporate car sharing has a great way to go. If you just think about all the pool cars existing across Europe, those cars actually enable them with some tech. They are then corporate car sharing vehicles. So it doesn't take much for this to happen. It's just a case of, again, education, commitment from both sides, both from the providers and the operators to move in this way. And provide benefits, because it's all about employees at the end of the day. Fundamentally, again, we all have a duty to support the societal change that's going on. That's kind of car sharing. On the ride sharing front as well, this is absolutely exploding. BlaBlaCar is probably the principal one here in terms of but there's companies all around the place who are growing and starting to provide alternatives to long distance. And again, that ability to team up with people, share the cost, build that community. And again, if you look at who's involved in this, manufacturers are getting involved. BMW's got strategic partnerships with Flink, GM is invested in that also. Fiat Chrysler are looking at corporate carpooling. All of these different mobility categories, you have a variety of people who are all taking stakes or looking at this, piloting to try to understand it a little bit better. Because fundamentally, as an industry, we've got to get much better at understanding the driver. That's the holy grail, the driver. I've been in leasing quite a while, and I remember back in the days when leasing was just managing metal. You didn't care about the driver. Now it's all about the driver, and increasingly about all the employees. So that's ride sharing, obviously massive. One thing I wanted to just touch on, peer-to-peer. Now, when it comes to car sharing, obviously there's an asset, and that asset needs to be utilised. And typically, car sharing companies need to have about 14-15% utilisation to break even. That's a challenge, and it's a challenge because you've got an asset to manage as well. You've got to get rid of that asset. You've got to keep it maintained, etc. Peer-to-peer is incredibly interesting and fast growing, and I'm very, very interested to see how the industry is going to react to peer-to-peer and provide for drivers the ability for them to then put that onto a platform. So a few things have started. You know, Ford have been testing a few things with Easy Car Club and Get Around. I'm fully expecting by now, by 2020, that all of you are providing the ability for people to sublease their vehicles, stick them onto platforms, and in effect, start to make money from their vehicle, or at least compensate, offset against their lease costs. Private lease, as we know, is increasingly big in Europe. I mean, we've got Mike here from the US. You know, 34% of vehicles in the States are now private lease, and I expect by now that we'll be up to sort of maybe 20% for in the retail space. So the companies in this space now, Get Around, Turo, Tamica, Drivy. I think Drivy got 50 million recently in terms of funding. Who's heard of Cruve? Ah, good. Someone's been reading the papers. Cruve is from Daimler. Cruve is a private car sharing app that they launched this week. That is incredibly disruptive. Seeing some of the comments about that from other manufacturers, it was kind of, shit, this is getting real now. And it's not just about Daimler cars, it's any car. They are providing the platform for you to share your vehicle. So if you don't think it's happening, it is happening, and this is going to be massive. If individuals can now rent out their car for when they don't use it, make informed choices about when they travel, in what kind of mode they travel, and actually making revenue at the back end, this is a game changer. So watch this space, and I would expect there to be plenty more of announcements in the coming months. So we've talked about most of these are kind of some of the key mega trends that are kind of impacting the market right now, but connected, autonomous, sharing, and electric are the ones that are kind of moving us into an integrated door-to-door mobility, integrated multimodal network. Bunch of categories. I've talked about sharing already, but within rental is going to become increasingly important as people want more and more flexibility. Micro-mobility, I know as leasing providers, a lot are doing good business in terms of then selling e-bikes on top of that as part of a package, part of a mobility package. And the integrated mobility space is filled by a number of companies, and they're all working together, and increasingly by now, 2020, they'll be working even closer together. Corporate is very, very important. So from a retail perspective, a lot of these mobility solutions have been developed in the retail space. Now they've been mature, they're in a place where they can be sold to corporates. So the carpooling and ride sharing, a lot of, 15% now of that is corporate users. I'd expect by now, 2020, that to be significantly higher. Parking, hugely disruptive market. It's one of the big problems when it comes to fleets. It's great, you can drive them around, then when do you bloody park the things? And then managing all of the administration around the parking as well. That's all going to change because the connected car will just sort it all out and bill it. In terms of the customers, we talk about the big fleet operators. The cities are going to be, for mobility providers, the customer. They are deciding now what cars come in, what mode of transport you should have. So therefore, they've got parking which they want to make money out of, but equally they want to free that space up to actually make the cities healthier. And cities, we're sitting in one right now, Barcelona. They're already massively engaged in kind of smart transportation, rolling out a whole new system which allows them to use all transport, the bike schemes, etc. You've got the UK, which is pushing very hard on autonomous. They want to be a leader in autonomous. You've got the Netherlands and its circular economy, really the collaborative effects. So they're trying to kind of really build on that sustainability. The cities are going to drive the regulation. They're going to drive the health of their residents, and they're going to be pushing the mobility as a service concept and particularly mobility budgets. So I've got 5 things, because I was asked to kind of think about 2020 and mobility headlines. I think by now we've actually seen, I talked about the wheel and partnerships. I think actually we're going to see some even more embedded partnerships. I can see fleet management companies and travel management companies merging, so I've flippantly put a couple there, as potential new businesses that are now available. Driving to zero, I think, is a really important, it's a thing that's going to come through here. Businesses and consumers can benefit from mobility. They can drive down their cost. if you so chose, you could have mobility for free. I believe that's possible. In the same way that the manufacturers are like trying to drive down safety to a point where there's no accidents, I actually think there is a model here where everybody can, well, not everybody, but a lot of people can have mobility for pretty much nothing. We're moving to pay per miles travelled and flexible subscriptions. You know, if I had a show of hands, how many people own their mobile phone? Very few of you, I would suggest. You know, you have a contract. So you're going to have a mobility contract. I mean, that is happening. That is happening. We're sitting here in 2020. That is for sure. The company car is knocked off balance. I say off balance because we know what's happening with that in terms of accounting standards. Private lease, rental. I think rental is going to be really important in terms of a right to use. I don't think a company is going to want to have 50 company cars. They'll say, I need access to 50 vehicles. So how much? Give me a rental price for all of those 50 vehicles and I'll pay it on a month. I don't want it on my balance sheet. I just want to pay a price for vehicles, for use of those vehicles. And I think obviously the outright purchase piece in terms of unbundling, that's going to be an increasingly interesting area as well. Last but not least, space, the mobility frontier. You know, the city for me is the customer. It's going to be the customer of the future. It's the customer of today, but increasingly more. And I think space, because they've got space in their cities, they want to move it, they want to change it to something else. Those roads, you know, potentially those roads could start getting dug up in some cities and turned into something more exciting. Green spaces, more housing, affordable housing in cities, because they're going to be more urbanized. So that's my view of 2020. Mobility disruption, embrace it.
Well, Graeme, this was a very clear and strong presentation on smart mobility in the digital age. But I have to adapt my vocabulary, because before taking a break, I said that it was obvious that there were tremendous changes, that shift happens. You said shit happens. Thank you.